So I'm going to talk a little bit today about applications and data. This is not a new topic. This is something that, again, I've got Imperva in my blood. I've been dealing with for the last 11 years. But it's something I think that is very topical because I don't think we've solved this problem. And so I'll talk about some of the statistics that I'm seeing in meeting with CISOs and some new ideas and some traction I think we're starting to see and going in the right direction. So just a little background, it'll be 11 years in January at Imperva, which is in the Silicon Valley, is like dog years at a security company. But I've had a number of different roles that kind of keeps it interesting. Current roles, I travel all over, so I added Argentina last week and Scotland yesterday to the list here. The benefit of this is I just get a very broad view of what's going on in different environments, regulatory as well as security challenges that each of these regions and countries are facing. And I just wanted to share at a high level some of the things that we see from a macro level and also just my own personal experience. We're becoming numb to this, right? As a consumer, as someone in the industry, I don't even click and read about the data breaches anymore because there's just so many of them and it's just over and over and over again. And so it sort of got me thinking as I put together this presentation as to what can we be doing better? What are we not focusing on? What are we not really taking seriously to address this problem? And again, if you look at these companies, these are companies that have huge security budgets and security teams. These aren't small organizations. And a lot of these are very heavily regulated. Everything in blue here is healthcare in the US, which is regulated. You've got financial services, right? So if we start with, okay, where do we look? Where do we sort of shine the flashlight? The Verizon data breach report that comes out every year, right? We've been seeing this again for years. Every single year I look at it, databases are number one in terms of the source of data that's been taken. And if you think about it, it's pretty simple, right? Databases are structured data. It's like going to the supermarket. They've got all those aisles and rows and they're numbered and each one has a label. If you want vegetables, you know that's aisle 4. If you want ice cream, it's aisle 12. I don't have to take the entire database. I can go shopping by tables. And those tables are usually named, first name, last name, address, medical record number, whatever it is. And so I can basically go shopping in the database if I can get to it. I can get to it through the web application server. That's the front door, if you will. That's open 24/7. I just need to find vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, those types of things. But more commonly what we're seeing is with insider threats, it's someone that has access, that has privilege, that's already inside the organization. And the challenge with this, and we look at databases, and I presented at UKSec yesterday, and you start talking about databases and people just, they just, especially in our space and security, they start to get overwhelmed. I think we're starting to see that numbness come into effect here as well, where optimism's going the wrong direction. We're not feeling more optimistic about stopping the data breaches. We're becoming more pessimistic, actually. As the weakest links shift from mobile devices and social media to now containers and microservices and cloud infrastructure, it's a shift from awareness now to I just can't find good people. Right? Somebody told me that the unemployment rate in cybersecurity is 0. Right? If you want a good job, you can go out and find one tomorrow. But what's interesting is the greatest concerns maintain the same. Phishing. Well, why is it phishing? Well, that's because that's what makes the most noise. Right? If you've got 1,000 employees and you've got, at Imperva, we did some phishing exercises. 33% of our employees were clicking on the most basic phishing exercises, including my boss, who's our CTO. That's why it's this funny story. That's why it's the greatest concern. But we're still focused on malware. We're still focused on phishing. We're not focused on the data. And I think this is starting to change. It's starting to shift. But I think part of the reason is the regulators have said, hey, you should be focused on the data for a long time. They've been dragging us, kicking and screaming to focus on the data. And so we just do barely enough to sort of click that box for compliance, right? We just do barely enough. In the database world, what that means, let's say for PCI compliance, is I look at select commands against credit card data, and that's all I look at. I don't look at all the other things that are going on around my databases. I don't look at non-PCI databases. And so we're starting to see that shift. And I think it's a number of different reasons. Organizations are getting tired. They're getting fatigued with chasing their tail with things like malware and phishing and all this stuff that just keeps happening. And the other reason is we've got to make a change, or we've got to do something different to sort of change the trending. I'm not sure why this first one, CISO's concerned that breaches go undetected. I'm not sure why it's not 100%. It's only 78%, but that's definitely a concern. Organizations can't keep up with the volume, right? We all know this. We're sending too much volume to our SOC, to our SIM teams. And again, 0% unemployment in the space, right? So this really boils down to visibility, volume, and expertise. And while I'm starting to be more optimistic about this is, while we're not finding more people to solve the problem, some of the technology and the advancements in machine learning that everyone's talking about are starting to give us a little bit more wind in our sails to solve this problem. So this is the visibility problem. And if you subscribe to databases being the #1 source of data leakage, look at all the unknowns. This is because most organizations, particularly ones that aren't regulated, don't have visibility into what has been done after a user or an application logs into the database. They've got all kinds of controls about who can get onto the network, who can get there, identity and access management. But after that connection is into the database, that's up to the DBA team. Security has no visibility. And as a result, when we have a data breach, we don't know what's been taken. And so we're kind of dancing around the problem, right? We've got identity and access management, anti-malware, UBA, all these different tools, and that's very important. But at the same time, what we're not comfortable with and where we're missing sort of the ball, I think, is we don't have that visibility post-login as to what someone did after they logged in, especially a privileged user, right? A malicious or careless user. That's up to the DBA team. That's up to the business, and security kind of doesn't get access to that. And that's, I think, where we're starting to see a little bit of a shift. So that's visibility, volume. So this is actually from a customer in Singapore that I met with. This is only 195 databases, so 7.2 billion transactions. To me, it sounds like a lot. If you're in the application world, this is actually not much. One of our financial customers in Scotland this week told me they have an application that sees 1 million transactions per second to the database. Right, so this is not that much volume, but from a security standpoint, generating 10,000 alerts per week, that's too many for 2 full-time employees to look at. And so this is something that we see as a challenge and starting to get more optimistic because machine learning type things will help with that. So that's volume, visibility, expertise. So it's a little bit hard to see for those in the back, but if you search on network security, you find 1.8 million people out there on LinkedIn with that experience. If you search on database security, it goes down to like 34,000. There's just not that many people that understand and can look at and interpret. If I do have visibility and I start to get a handle on the volume and I give you an alert that says, hey, I saw this SQL statement do something weird on an Oracle database. There's not that many people that understand that, right? And so this is kind of illustrates the problem. These are 5 different types of SQL languages for the exact same statement. They're all different, right? And so even if you do conscribe someone from the DBA team and say, hey, you're going to be in security now. I've got, let's say, Splunk, which I can write all kinds of policies for. I'm going to write some scripts to look for different commands against privileged data within my database. Well, I don't just have Oracle, right? I've got SQL, I've got DB2, I've got all these other systems. Maybe now I've got RDS and Amazon. You have to have the ability to normalize all this in a much more automated way, in a way that scales. And so really the approach that I think the industry is starting to take and I'm excited about, again, because of advancements in machine learning and visibility and dealing with the volume, is to take this data-centric approach. I need to know what happens inside of my most valuable data repository, specifically databases, data shares, file systems, so that I can answer these questions. So that gets to, okay, if we've got all these things, right, and we talk about insider threats, people are the weakest link. If we all agree that users and data, this intersection of users and data is where data breaches happen, what should I be looking for? And so most organizations, most mature organizations have this type of information. I can very easily get the IP address. I can probably see that a user uses SQL Plus or Toad, whatever they're using to connect to that system. I've got sort of all of the front-end information coming into that system. And this is where organizations are taking this and feeding it into SIM. They're feeding it into things like UEBA or user behavioral analytics, which is great. It's a good step to look for things like reconnaissance type activities or lateral movement. But if I want to look at data access and I want to look at, okay, what did those users do? What operations did they perform? Was it a select? Was it an insert, update, delete? What type of operation? What are they doing against the database? How many rows were returned? Was it 500 rows? Was it 5 million rows? How much data was returned? That could be an indication of something. What we're focused on is combining these two things. And the idea is by combining these two things, applying some deep domain knowledge and machine learning that understands how users interact with these data sets, I can then extract the context. So what we're seeing, just to give you an idea, going back to that Singapore bank example with the 7.2 billion events and the 10,000 alerts per week, by applying some of the newer approaches with the machine learning algorithms, we're seeing about 1,000 to 1 alert reduction ratio. And the most important thing is not just the volume, but building in this context. And so what that looks like, just to give you an idea, is I want someone that's straight out of university, that's sitting in the SOC at 2 a.m., that unfortunate soul that's building up his or her career, that's just getting started in security, to be able to look at this and say, okay, I don't know much about Oracle, I don't know much about SQL or DB2 or whatever, but I can see, okay, this is John in IT. He's used a couple different machines to access these databases. Here's his normal working hours. Here's the systems he's touched. Here is what John does relative to his peers in the organization. Right? If he's accessing 100 files per day and the rest of the group is accessing more or less, that's going to be one indication. And then from here, I want to basically be able to tell that person that's looking at this, that's hopefully a non-DBA, what exactly happened in clean, plain English. Well, in this case, it was a user that accessed an application, accessed data inappropriately. I can see more information, so as I become more familiar with this, I can see it was a stored procedure. 1.4 million rows returned. Oh, well, that's interesting. That's a lot of data. Why is someone in IT going and accessing this much data? And from here, where it gets really interesting is I want to be able to piece it together in a way that automates the correlation of different severity incidents. So this user's never accessed these tables before. That's interesting. But that's a minor influence. That could just be a change in the person's role. This user's used a service account. A service account is the application account that connects to the database. Usually that's whitelisted. Usually it's very high volume. Usually it can do any sort of operation against the database. Why is an individual user using the service account to connect to the database? Why isn't he using a privileged account that's designed for that type of operation? That's interesting. Looks like he's accessed more records than anyone else with any time within his history, and these tables seem to hold sensitive data. So if I knew exactly what I was looking for on the database, and I had visibility, and I had the tooling to be able to go create a policy to look for all these things, I can capture it. The problem is, usually most organizations don't have the time or expertise or even interest in dealing with it. And so by applying the machine learning and the deep domain understanding, I can piece this all together to bubble this up to the SOC and have them actually make sense of it. So this is where we're trying to get to solve the visibility, volume, and expertise problem. And again, we're starting to see organizations kind of starting to drive this traction and say, okay, we've got to focus on data-centric so I can be able to solve and answer all these questions. Did they take anything? How much did they take? And was it different from their normal behavior? Was it different from their peers? So having that visibility, volume, and expertise to be able to solve all those things. And I think that's just about out of time. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.